Today I would like to talk to you about Puck. You know, the ruggedly handsome man who helped women with their chores and of whom they told naughty stories. The fairy who transformed from this to this, making Puck not only an interesting fairy, but a great example of how fairies and art influenced each other through history. To this Puck, a humorous figure who represented dreams, humor, and freedom. Or, as one scholar put it, nothing pleases Puck more than to make the morning fire, sweep the house, grind the mustard and malt, draw water, and help the maids with breaking hemp, bolting and dressing flax, as well as spinning. Robin Goodfellow was typically depicted with a huge phallus and a broom. It takes a little present-day imagination to come up with a reason why early modern women might have sat around the fire over their darning, sharing tales about a figure with such attributes. That's right, in the Elizabethan era, women in sewing and spinning circles loved to tell stories about a huge ferryman who could help them with their chores. Puck is connected to the Robin Goodfellow and the hobgoblins, rough, hairy spirits which do domestic chores. Useful as they are easily offended and often mischievous. They are not exclusively domestic, but are also associated with streams, pools, and rocks. So in addition to being a domestic fairy, Puck was a household spirit. At this point, it is useful to look to Puck's Anglo-Saxon homeland, where there is a fairy known as the Puck or Niskipuck. These stories evolved and so don't necessarily represent the original Puck, but there are similarities in the character, which is interesting. Here, Puck were often wild fairies that people would bring into their homes by building them nests out of straw or logs with holes in them. They could then capture or offer the fairy some food, often butter or oatmeal, in return for living with them. Those homes with these fairies in them would prosper. Beer brewed better, cattle thrived, household chores got done quicker, and everything just seemed to generally go well for them. That said, inviting a wild fairy into your house is a little like inviting a wild cat. I mean, it can go great most of the time, but every once in a while, the mood for mischief will strike and the cat will pounce on your keyboard while you're trying to type or scratch up some of your furniture. Niskipuck are like this as well. They can cause mischief and trouble, steal from the neighbors. In Shakespeare's A Midsummer's Night Dream, it is interesting to note that the fairy and Puck introduced this character differently. For the fairy mentions that he is the one who frightens maidens, steals cream from the milk, makes it harder to churn butter, and generally causes people to get lost. Yet she also mentioned that those who call him Hobgoblin will have their work done better and get good luck. Puck, however, speaks of making Oberon smile and punishing those he feels have violated fairy morality, such as taking the shape of a crab apple to bob against the lips of a gossip and cause her to spill ale on herself. He also takes the form of a 3-foot stool in order to cause those telling sad or boring stories to fall, so that everyone might laugh and have a merrier time. Within these lines we can see the push between Puck's multiple natures. He is a mischievous trickster, on whom bad things were blamed, a helpful figure who was believed to bring good fortune, and a moralizing figure. Contrasting their wild fairy nature in chapbooks, Robin Goodfellow was often said to be the half-human child of the fairy king Oberon, who was granted the power of shape-shifting by his father, which adds a fun layer when watching him cause Oberon trouble during the Midsummer's Night Dream. It's difficult to say how early this aspect of his character was added, if it was purely a literary device or something from folklore. During this time, there was a spike in literacy, and yeomen began to write. These writers knew fairies well from their mothers and grandmothers, and their new readers knew them and loved them because they were familiar. So while the fairies appealed to the court, they also appealed to the country, helping make the vogue of fairies. Before this, people didn't want to display too much knowledge of fairy lore, which could have led to the charge of heresy. When this changed, people wrote more regularly and honestly about the delightful aspects of fairy nature. This doesn't mean that they didn't make things up, however, so it is sometimes difficult to sort what is literary from what is folkloric. At this time, the English world had been turned on its head, as it went through rapid changes as well. The religious assumptions here were re-examined. The English Civil War had beheaded a king. Holidays like Christmas had been outlawed by his non-king successor. People were grasping for something. What people often grasped for during times like this was in part spiritualism and often fairies. So people began to focus on the more frolicsome, frivolous, tiny side of fairies. A little school of friends among the poets, caught up by the deliciousness of Shakespeare's fairies, and coming from counties where small fairies belonged to the folk tradition, amused themselves and each other by writing fantasies on littleness. Nymphidia and the Wedding of a Fae has a line, "The fairies are hopping, the small flowers cropping, with dew dropping. At night themselves they lay upon the soft leaves." The idea of tiny, frolicsome, and whimsical fairies didn't begin at this time. Rather, these aspects of their nature were likely emphasized. Another aspect of Puck was emphasized early on, but faded later, was that of Puck as a moralizing figure. Like most house fairies, he hated laziness and certain bad behavior. Writers used Puck as a way to teach people the importance of domestic morality because of this. Over time, however, the more whimsical and mischievous sides of his nature grew, especially as we got into the Romanticist era. During this time, the purity and innocence and troublesome nature of children was to be celebrated.